It's tragic. I hate even talking about this, but I think we can all learn from it. And again, I think I've said it before and I'll say it again, when in doubt, go around. That go around, we should always kind of be anticipating that go around it, not just on final. It could be anywhere in the pattern. And so if you go too fast, go around. Just go around and do another one. In this situation with the airspace, I think there's something to point out here. We don't want to violate the rules in the FARs in the airspace, but if you have to make it safer in your current situation, what's a phone call?
That's Cirrus pilot Eric Gundersen talking about a tragic accident in Southern California. And while the aircraft involved was a Cirrus SR22, the factors that could be readily determined about this accident, well, they apply to whatever airplane you may fly. Hello again, and welcome to Aviation News Talk, a weekly show with relevant news and flying tips for pilots and student pilots to help keep you safe. I'm Max Trescott. And of course, if you have any interest in buying a new or used Cirrus SR20, SR22, or SF50 Vision jet, or if you'd like flight training in one, I talk with multiple listeners every week who call me up to ask for advice on next steps and sometimes about the trade-offs of buying new versus a used aircraft. And if you're thinking about a new airplane, definitely call me first. Call me today at 650-967-2500 for a free consultation and possibly a free demo flight. Last week in episode 129, pilot examiner and patron supporter Jason Blair gave me a mock instrument check ride. So if you have a check ride coming up or you want to review your IFR knowledge, you may want to check it out. And just a quick note, if you haven't already, please click the subscribe button on your phone. Not only will that alert you when new shows are available each week, but it will also boost our rankings, making it more likely that other pilots will find the show. Plus, this week in the news, Mooney appears to be shutting down again. The FAA is already looking at what's next after ADS-B, and we have a heartwarming story about pilots helping others who are less fortunate. All this and more, and the news starts now. From multiple news sources, on Thursday, November 7th, an SR-22 crashed into a house while on approach to land at the Cable Airport in Upland, California. Now, that's approximately 30 miles east of Los Angeles and about 5 miles from the Ontario airport. The pilot was killed, but the occupants of the house, a father and his 2-year-old son, were spared because the child wanted to play and the father had taken him outside. They were just coming back into the house into the kitchen as the plane crashed into the house, destroying it. The SR-22 was flying from Zamperini Field in Torrance to Cable Airport in Upland when the plane crashed about 3,000 feet from the airport while turning from base to final. The crash has been the subject of a lot of discussion over the past week on COPA, the Cirrus Owner Pilots Association forums, and later we'll talk with COPA board member Eric Gundersen, who's created a YouTube video that gives some insight as to why this aircraft crashed. From avweb.com comes a story that Mooney is shutting down and employees are being furloughed, to which I would say, again, this has happened before. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, Kerrville, Texas-based Mooney Aircraft has reportedly shut down and released its entire staff, according to the Kerrville Daily Times. The Times reported, and we can confirm that Mooney's voicemail system states that at this time, all Mooney employees have been furloughed, and therefore we cannot take your call. AvWeb says they've been unable to reach any of Mooney's staff or management, and understands that the firm's workforce was down to just 50 people preceding the furlough. To those watching Mooney's sales numbers over the past 3 quarters, the shutdown is probably not a big surprise. According to Gamma sales records, Mooney sold 2 Acclaim Ultras in each of the first 2 quarters and another 4 in the third quarter after selling 14 aircraft in 2018 at a value of $10 million. For context, Cirrus has sold 310 aircraft in just the first 3 quarters of 2019. At AirVenture 2018, Mooney said it intended to build 20 aircraft that year, but would ramp up toward 40 in 2019 and maintain 50 aircraft a year starting in 2020. Mooney's workers were furloughed in 2017, 4 years after restarting production under new owners Soaring America Aircraft. Mooney had not been producing new aircraft for nearly 5 years before that. The last Acclaim Ultras to roll out the door, the only model to be produced this year, were valued at nearly $850,000 each, according to the Gamma report. From the NTSB.gov website, U.S. aviation fatalities increased in 2018. U.S. civil aviation deaths increased from 347 in 2017 to 393 in 2018, according to preliminary statistics released by the NTSB. Most aviation deaths in 2018 took place in general aviation operations, when 381 were killed compared to 331 the year before. Fatal accident rate in GA was 1.029 accidents per 100,000 hours, compared to 2017's rate of 0.935 per 100,000 hours. So not only has the number of accidents increased, but the rate has also increased. Accidents in on-demand Part 135 operations, which encompass charters, air taxis, air tours, and medical services, claimed 12 lives, down from 16 in 2017. It's disappointing to see the fatal GA accident rate increase after 2 years with a rate below 1.0 per 100,000 hours, said NTSB Chairman Robert Sumwalt. Although the fatal accident rate for Part 135 decreased in 2018, in recent years the NTSB has investigated some Part 135 accidents that had glaring safety deficiencies. He says that aviators in both the GA and Part 135 communities need to renew their emphasis on building and sustaining a safety culture, and recipients of our safety recommendations in this area need to implement those life-saving recommendations. The statistics do not reveal potential reasons for the increase in fatalities, but the NTSB has addressed aviation safety in both the GA and Part 135 communities, including highlighting related safety issues on its most wanted list of transportation safety improvements. Improve the safety of Part 135 aircraft flight operations is on the NTSB's 2019-2020 most wanted list, and the agency recently held a roundtable in Anchorage, Alaska, to identify solutions to Part 135 flight operations safety. From CNN.com, a gender reveal stunt led to a plane crash in Texas. Another gender reveal stunt went horribly wrong and led to the recent plane crash in Texas, according to NTSB accident report. The pilot was flying a plane at a low altitude on September 7th as part of an elaborate gender reveal for a friend, according to the report. Now, just an aside here, if you're not familiar with a gender reveal, that's essentially a party, a celebration in which parents, friends, and family use some elaborate method to let people know the sex of the baby by revealing a blue color or a pink color. In this particular case, the pilot dumped 350 gallons of pink water from the plane, but the plane was too slow and stalled. The pilot was not injured in this crash in Turkey, Texas, about 100 miles southeast of Amarillo. The plane's other passenger had minor injuries. The aircraft was an Air Tractor 602 aerial application aircraft, so essentially a crop duster. The report also says there were 2 people in the single-seat aircraft. The incident was the latest in a string of gender reveal stunts gone awry. In October, a family in Iowa inadvertently built a pipe bomb for a party that exploded and killed a grandmother. And last year, an off-duty Border Patrol agent was ordered to pay more than $8 million in restitution after his gender reveal caused a forest fire in Arizona. From avweb.com, Float plans a January launch for their Southern California short-distance commuter service. The new commuter flight service for Float, which stands for Fly Over All Traffic, is planning to open a series of short-distance routes between GA airports and SoCal aimed at residents commuting more than 90 minutes daily. According to the company, flight times will average between 15 and 30 minutes at monthly subscription rates starting around $1,250. The Monday through Friday service will officially launch in the LA area in January after running trial routes in December. Quote, with the high cost of living, more Southern Californians are finding nice homes at attractive prices in the suburbs outside of thriving business locations, which leads people to link their commutes, said Float CEO and co-founder Arnel Guilleng. Float not only benefits the individual driver or passenger, but also corporations looking to establish cost-effective and time-effective transportation opportunities for work teams. Float, which is operated by Southern Airways Express, says it has agreements with nearly 40 airports across Southern California and plans to expand to other high commuter density areas after its launch. The company is currently taking route requests and collecting information on commuter routes and schedules in the Los Angeles area via its website. Now, I went out to the Float website because I was curious to see what kind of aircraft they were using. It doesn't say there, but I did find on Wikipedia that Southern Airways Express has a fleet of 19 Cessna 208 Caravans and also a pair of Piper Chieftains. From AIN Online, FAA sees trust growing in their compliance program. As the FAA's compliance program enters its 5th year, a senior FAA official said the agency and industry are seeing evidence of growing trust, transparency, and effective use of safety management systems. The compliance program relies on voluntary reporting and corrective actions such as training and improved procedures to address deviations or safety issues. Enforcement is reserved for the reckless, inappropriate risk-taking or those that are unwilling or unable to comply, said Tim Miller, director of the FAA's Office of Air Carrier Safety Assurances. The The compliance program is simple but has many moving parts that require attention to detail both on the regulator and the industry side, he said. It moves away from the former approach to accountability that places blame and focuses on function to an accountability that accepts responsibility and results in action for change. Quote, compliance means a lot more than just following the rules. Far more important is proactive risk management, he said. Improvement in safety, he added, rises from the operator's willingness and ability to proactively address risk management to deal with the issues that cannot be addressed by federal regulations. He says there is even further evidence of this collaboration, and that's been a jump in submissions to various voluntary reporting systems. For example, he said that in the last full fiscal year for which the FAA has data on the Aviation Safety Reporting Service, now that's the service that's run by NASA, their ASRS, they said that submissions have grown to more than 96,000 reports, and in the last 12 months it's grown to 131,000 reports, which was a 26% increase. And I do want to just kind of add here parenthetically, from my perspective, having flown for more than 40 years, I have seen the pendulum swing at the FAA from kind of the kinder, gentler FAA to the very strong enforcement, punishment-oriented FAA. So we're certainly in the fifth year of this swing toward the kinder, gentler approach, and I think it definitely has a lot of merit. In international news, Canada's ADS-B mandate is delayed. This comes from AOPA. With the FAA's ADS-B out mandate less than 7 weeks away, the industry is learning more about the capabilities and limitations of space-based ADS-B, including that NAV Canada has postponed its ADS-B out mandate. Canada's air navigation service provider in January revealed that as early as January 2021, it would require a 1090 MHz extended squitter ADS-B out with antenna diversity, which means both a top and a bottom transponder antenna, to facilitate data reception by satellites. But the postponement, announced November 13th, will not change the Canadian air navigation service provider's reliance on Aireon, the space-based ADS-B system, and is not likely to amend the requirement for an upward-pointing antenna. It's reacting to an October 21 letter from Transport Canada, which told NAV Canada that because some operators will not be able to meet the implementation timeline, quote, until the proper regulation is in place and enforced, NAV Canada will have to accommodate air operators as per current regulations and practices. In other words, the ADS-B performance requirements must go through a rulemaking process, which the industry sought in March. So why is the requirement for two antennas on top and bottom not likely to change? Well, NAV Canada shared some of its satellite ADS-B reception data, and it matches what research by the FAA and some other agencies has indicated, that satellites cannot receive data from belly-mounted antennas alone with enough reliability to meet performance requirements. And that certainly makes sense to me because antennas on the bottom of the aircraft are going to be blocked from a full view of the sky. The FAA has indicated satellite-based ADS-B may be the next step in ADS-B's evolution here in the U.S., enabling surveillance across the globe. The agency said it's taking a phased approach that will address technical, operational, and safety issues before committing to a long-term investment in the technology. It is focusing on some key data update rates. And research supported by AOPA so far shows that aircraft with antennas only on their bellies have signal reliability concerns. An operational evaluation of space-based ADS-B in the Caribbean, chosen largely because of reliability issues with the Grand Turk's radar, could lead to use of space-based ADS-B in oceanic airspace controlled by FAA's Miami, New York, and other air route traffic control centers. Also in international news from globalnews.ca, lingering Cessna 206 design problems between a Northwest Territories plane crash that killed 3 people, according to the TSB. The Transportation Safety Board says a design problem that has remained unaddressed for decades in a popular small airplane contributed to 3 deaths in a crash in the Northwest Territories. Quote, Transport Canada and the board don't believe that design meets the intent of the criteria that the aircraft was certified under, said Garrett Vermeer, a senior board investigator. The board released its investigation into an August 2018 crash of a Cessna 206 during a sightseeing flight to Nahanni National Park. The 5-passenger float-equipped plane was landing on Little Doctor Lake when the right wing hit the water. The plane flipped upside down and was partially submerged. The pilot and 1 passenger were quickly rescued. The pilot dove back in to try to free the others, but was unsuccessful. The board's report confirms the conclusion of a preliminary investigation that said the passengers further back couldn't open the plane's rear cargo doors. The doors were blocked by the plane's wing flaps that had been extended for landing. The problem has been understood for nearly 3 decades, but Canadian and U.S. authorities have been unable to find a feasible way to retrofit all Cessna 206 models. Aviation regulators in Canada and the U.S. discussed the problem extensively with Cessna between 1999 and 2003. Transport Canada looked at it again in 2005 and commissioned a report on exiting submerged float planes. No action was ever taken. Quote, results of the studies indicated there was no suitable design change that could feasibly be applied to the entire Cessna 206 fleet, said the board's preliminary report. By May 2008, the file was put on hold due to other priorities and the absence of a clear way forward. Cessna has manufactured a retrofit that would force the door open, but installation has not been made mandatory. The board said the flaw has caused 11 deaths since 1989. Transport Canada, which regulates airplane safety, has restricted the plane's passenger capacity to 5 when using floats, and the board report says the department has now promised action. It says Transport Canada said it would take the matter up with U.S. regulators to force Cessna to fix the problem and devise a way to retrofit all models of the 206. If the Americans declined, Transport Canada said it would act unilaterally to force those using the plane to install the retrofit Cessna has already developed. Vermeer said that there are 1,100 Cessna 206 planes licensed in Canada. And yes, I have flown a few Cessna 206s, and that is indeed an issue. There are rear doors on the right side that allow you to get access to the rear seats of the aircraft, and when the flaps are down, those doors are blocked by the flaps. In fact, you need to be careful to make sure that those doors are not open if you happen to lower the flaps on the ground for a pre-flight inspection. And finally, as we near the Thanksgiving and holiday seasons, here's a heartwarming story about pilots using airplanes to help others. This comes from the McPhersonSentinel.com. That's a newspaper in Kansas. It says, area pilots shuttle coats to Wounded Knee. Last weekend, Carl Weaver and members of the EAA were flying what is precious cargo to some from Mound Ridge, Kansas to the Pine Ridge Reservation at Wounded Knee, South Dakota as part of a relay. Winter coats, hats, gloves, and clothing. It really is a need, Weaver said. A lot of time donations go to people who don't really need them. But I tell you what, I came away from there the first year with tears in my eyes. Those kids were so appreciative of this clothing. This is Weaver's 4th year of being involved. They will be flying bags of coats, mittens, and hats collected in Oxford, Mississippi to help the children of Wounded Knee, who live in the poorest county in the United States, with 98% of students at WKDS receiving free or reduced price lunch. Now, WKDS is the Wounded Knee District School. According to the EAA, an average of 17 people live in each house. Imagine that, 17 people in one house. They said others live in tents or cars, even in the harsh South Dakota winter when temperatures regularly plummet below freezing. It's just a mess up there, Weaver said. By contrast, in Oxford, winter gear is not needed quite as regularly. Quote, this started in Mississippi where I was raised, Weaver said. There were a lot of children going to school down there and shedding their nice new winter clothes because in the South you only have a day here and a day there of wintertime. The lost and found department of those schools were inundated with clothing that nobody claimed. According to EAA, Anita Havens, a teacher at the Delta Davidson Elementary in Oxford, Mississippi, first found the need of winter clothing in Wounded Knee in 2016 while doing some research online. At Delta Davidson, each year dozens of winter coats, many of them practically new, go unclaimed from the lost and found. Havens spoke with a principal and secured permission to donate the coats, then shared the project with her 4th grade class. Students started bringing in outgrown coats from home, collecting a total of 350 coats. Quote, this year there are twice as many donations. We have a lot of clothing to take up, Weaver said. However, she had no cost-effective way to ship the coats to South Dakota. Her husband, an airport administrator active in the EAA, suggested an airplane relay of small aircraft to make the trip. Quote, we have chapters all over the U.S., Weaver said. Each chapter meets once a month. We all do something like give children rides for free. The idea is to do something good with our airplanes. This year, there are about 1,000 coats headed north, packed in about 60 bags that weigh between 20 and 30 pounds each. Weaver said it's a long flight from Mississippi to South Dakota. The idea was to get 3 or 4 chapters of the EAA involved and shuttle the winter clothing to its destination. So far, what has worked is flights from Oxford to Mound Ridge and Mound Ridge to Wounded Knee. From Mound Ridge to Wounded Knee is about a 3-hour flight each way. Quote, I have some friends around here who have a soft spot in their heart for the children up there, Weaver said. We have 5 or 6 airplanes. Wow, what an inspiring story. Great job. Congratulations to everybody involved in that fantastic program. Well, that's the news for this week. Coming up, our weekly updates, and then we'll get to our main topic of the SR22 crash in Southern California. All right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. And here's some updates. After the news, I was just so interested in knowing more about the winter coat drive. I emailed Anita and her husband, Lynn, and they got right back to me. I wanted to get an update on what the current status there is. And they wrote, "Our effort to help these people has grown steadily over the past 4 years. We're hoping to see it continue to grow. It would really be great if individuals and flying clubs from all over the country could organize coat drives and flights from their local area to Pine Ridge. With enough participation, it could eventually become a large-scale event. As far as our current flying situation, we initially tried to recruit several EAA chapters along the route to participate. We found that a lot of the chapters were interested, but many of the pilots were elderly and were no longer up for cross-country flights of any distance. Any individual pilots or flying clubs along the route between Calhoun County, Mississippi to Mountain Ridge, Kansas, or from the second leg from Mountain Ridge to Pine Ridge are encouraged to pitch in and participate in next year's flight. They should just contact me at this email address." This year we used 6 planes that were absolutely packed full of vacuum packed bags. We delivered well over 1,000 coats to the needy kids in sizes that range from infant to adult. This sounds like a lot, but there are over 9 schools and an estimated 30,000 people living on this reservation. It's the poorest county in the entire U.S. I'd say that right now the greatest need is for other groups to organize collection drives from their local areas so we can have coats coming from all over the USA to help these people out. And she gives their email address. And her husband is named Charles Lynn, and so the email is Charles L. Havens, Havens, @yahoo.com, and I'll include that, of course, in the show notes. By the way, I looked up just a couple statistics about Pine Ridge, and I'll include a link to this as well. 97% of the population lives below the U.S. federal poverty line. Median household incomes, you're not going to believe this, $2,600 to $3,500 per year. There's no industry, technology, or commercial infrastructure, so the unemployment rate is 90%. Isn't that amazing? There's also links in that tell you where you can donate Christmas presents and other things that you might want to do. So check that out in our show notes. Of course, you can get the show notes by going to aviationnewstalk.com, or on your smartphone, you can just slide up on the picture that's associated with this episode. And a quick shout out to Sam Wiltsius. Sam has been one of our followers for a long time. He passed his CFI. He's up in Madison, Wisconsin. He says, "Thank you again for being such an inspiration." Sam, you're welcome. Congratulations. I hope you spread the love of flying to lots of students. Now here's what Bill from Maryland has to say about a fun East Coast fun flying destination that I've also been to.
Hello, Max. My name is Bill, and I'm a private pilot based in Maryland. I want to share with your listeners a destination I flew in June. It's the Hudson River Exclusion in New York City. Flying from Maryland, I approached New York City from the south, flying over New Jersey. The New York City skyline came into view about 30 miles out. As we approached, we asked New York Center for frequency change to 123.05, which is the common frequency for position reporting within the corridor. There's no airport or ATC monitoring that frequency. It's just VFR pilots making their required position reports in accordance to the SFRA rules. Our first position was the Verrazano Bridge. We approached Lower Manhattan. It was truly a remarkable sight. We had to stay below 1,500 feet to avoid the Class B airspace of Newark and JFK. It was odd to look at Freedom Tower, and the high wing of the Skylane blocked the view of the top of the tower because we were actually flying lower than the tower is tall. The Yankees had a home game, so there was a TFR over the stadium. We did a steep 180-degree turn at the Intrepid Memorial, and then we flew south down the West Bank. Our next reporting was the Statue of Liberty, and just like a commercial pilot maneuver of 8-zone pylons, we put the wingtip on the lady and circled her about 3 times. We exited to the south, and we flew down the New Jersey coast at about 3,000 feet, staying well above the banner towing guys who were blanketing the beaches that day. If you're a pilot anywhere in the Maryland or East Coast area, it's worth a day trip.
Thanks, Bill. This really brings back fond memories because I have flown this trip down the Hudson River a number of times when I lived in New York City and later in New Jersey. Now, I just love getting these fun flying destinations, so if you'd like to tell thousands of pilots about your favorite destination, just use the Voice Memos app on your iPhone or other smartphone and email it to me. Or you can use any smartphone and go to aviationnewstalk.com, click on Listener Questions at the top of the page, and record either a fun flying destination or a listener question. Now, I have a fun trip coming up this week. By the time you hear this, I'll probably be on the road. On Wednesday, I'll be flying via the airlines to Miami to pick up a 2016 Cirrus SR22 with its new owner, to bring it back to California starting on Thursday. Now, I know that past episodes where I've talked about the cross countries I've flown and interviewed the pilots I was flying with have been very popular. So yes, I'll plan to produce one of those soon so you can hear about my trip from Miami. Also, the new owner and I are going to be testing out some new pilot gear on the trip, so that's going to be fun for us, and I'll tell you more about that later. Now, my wife has always said in the past that something always happens on these trips, which is not always true, but already I'm getting the feeling that weather may be a factor. I've been looking at the long-range forecast for nearly a week, and while it looks like the first half of the trip from Florida to Texas will be smooth sailing, the forecasts are calling for some nasty stuff from Texas to California along the southern route that takes us over Albuquerque and Prescott, Arizona. The alternative would be to fly the northern route along Interstate 80 across Wyoming and Salt Lake City and then down to Reno. Usually one route or the other is going to be open. At this point, it looks like we'll probably go the southern route. And I think what will work out for us perhaps is it will fly on the first day to somewhere in Texas, spend the night there, and hopefully while we're sleeping, all of that weather should blow past us and be behind us in the morning. Looks like we should have fairly clear skies for the second half of our trip on Friday. And you may be wondering, hey, you're going to be in a late model SR22. Why don't you just turn on the de-icing system, climb up through the ice, get on top of the weather, and fly home? Well, not all Cirrus aircraft are equal. This particular 22 is normally aspirated, so we're limited as to how high we could climb because it doesn't have built-in oxygen, which we would have if it were a turbocharged SR22. But here's the biggie. It also doesn't have any anti-icing capability at all. It's a so-called clean wing, which doesn't have any TKS system on the airplane. So we can't afford to get into freezing clouds because we have no capability to remove ice. So right now the freezing level in the western U.S. looks like it'll be around 9,000 feet, which is about the minimum altitude we can fly through there VFR. And of course, we'd need to go even higher if we were IFR. So we really will need fairly clear skies for that second leg of the trip. First leg of the trip, yeah, we could be down below 9,000 feet and would not be picking up ice if we were IFR. But the second half of the trip, we really are going to need clear skies for the altitudes we're going to be flying at. And guess what? I have set up something special for listeners who've decided that, yes, this show, Aviation News Talk, is so important to you that you've taken the few minutes it takes to support the show through a small monthly donation through Patreon or PayPal. And here's how supporters will be able to interact with me during the trip. First, you will be able to play along with us in real time by analyzing the weather, then decide what you would do in our situation. And you'll even be able to share ideas or insights you have about where to stop along the way and what our best routing options may be as the weather changes in real time. Because while we're up there in the air, you can send us a text message which will reach us in the plane via satellite. Now, we're going to be limited to 160 characters, so please be brief and to the point. And I will definitely get back to you if you send us a message. And if you're thinking, oh, darn, I've been planning to become a Patreon member, but just haven't gotten around to it. And yeah, some of the people tell me that. Now's a good time to do it. We'll certainly be in the air on Thursday and Friday, November 21st and 22nd. And if the weather doesn't cooperate, well, then on Saturday as well. So if you sign up on Patreon anytime during the trip, you'll get instant access to all of our posts. And one of those will tell you where you can find the website where you can monitor our progress and send us messages via satellite. And I'm sorry, I wish I could give all listeners a chance to text me in the airplane, but we have thousands of listeners around the world, and I have to limit this in some way because satellite text messages do cost money, and I will have a few other things I'll need to do while I'm up there besides reading and answering text messages. And speaking of Patreon, let me thank some of our newest awesome supporters. We have a new super supporter, those who pledge more than $20 a month, and that's Jim Pittman. He added his pledge up. He's an airline pilot, CFI, and pilot examiner. And if you're looking for a check ride in Arizona, go to flywithjim.com. Other new Patreon members are Mosley Hardy, Joseph Smith Stewart, Shannon Monroe, Bill Watson, Brooks Evans, Martin Miller. And yes, we did lose a few already in the first couple weeks of this month, so we're always looking for new Patreon supporters to help fill in for those that drop out for various reasons. And let me thank all of our mega supporters. We have 8 of them who donate $50 a month or more. Brian Deere, who lives here in Northern California and flies a Turbo 206. He has a check ride coming up soon, and we met recently to talk about that. Tyson Weiss, co-founder of 4Flight. Victor Vogel, he flies out of Central Pennsylvania in a Cirrus. Tim Delaney here in Northern California. He's been flying for almost 50 years. He flies an SR22. Stephen Elop flies a 182 and a Citation M2. He's the CEO of API Jet. Larry Noe from New York City. He flies a Cirrus SR22. Mike Williams, president of Keomac and TCB Composites. He flies a 172, and he says he's listened to every episode. Wow, that's great. Seth Lake, he's a new DP giving check rides, specializes in teaching the multi-engine rating. You can check out his website at vsl.aero. And Rick Miller, he's a CFI in the Cincinnati area, teaching both out of Lincoln Flight Training Center and also with individuals that own their own aircraft. He says he'd love to teach full-time, but he still has that day job for a few more years. And if you want to become one of our supporters, it's incredibly easy. Just go out to aviationnewstalk.com/awesome to join via Patreon, or go to aviationnewstalk.com/PayPal. Now, in a moment, we're going to be talking about that deadly SR22 crash in Southern California, right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. Coming up, our guest makes references to a YouTube video that illustrates a lot of factors related to the recent crash in Southern California, and I've included a link to it in our show notes. Also, he mentions several acronyms. They include FOM, which is the Cirrus Flight Operations Manual, which provides guidance on how all maneuvers and landings are to be flown in a Cirrus. CSIP, which is Cirrus Standardized Instructor Pilot, so a flight instructor like me who's been trained at the factory. And CAPS, which stands for Cirrus Airframe Parachute System. Now here's our conversation with Eric Gundersen. Now let me tell you a little bit about Eric Gundersen. Eric is a graduate of Embry-Riddle in Prescott, Arizona, where he completed his bachelor's and his flight training in 2004. He then worked as an airline pilot for Atlantic Southeast Airlines before going back to school to earn an MBA and then joined the family manufacturing business, which is Evars Display in Ontario, California, and Shelby, North Carolina. In 2013, he started flying again, and he now owns a 2003 Cirrus SR22. He's also on the board of directors for COPA, the Cirrus Owner Pilots Association. Eric, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Max.
Yeah, and thanks for coming, especially under such sad circumstances. Obviously, we had a rather terrible accident on November 7th back at the Cable Airport, and I know you're very familiar with Cable Airport. Tell us how you came to know the airport, and tell us a little bit about where it's located and why perhaps it's just a little bit more challenging than some airports to fly in and out of.
Yeah, so Cable Airports are pretty much due north of me where I live, about 5 nautical miles or so. It's not my home airport, but when I came back from college in the airlines, I actually rented a 172 G1000 out of there, out of Cable. And so very familiar. I have hundreds of takeoffs and landings out of there. And what makes it really unique is the airspace around it. We have Ontario to the southeast, Brackett to the southwest, Chino just to the south of that. And then it actually is really close to the Los Angeles/Bravo airspace. And so there's this 1.5 mile kind of cookie cutout of the airspace, and it's in Class Echo airspace. So a lot of airplanes actually fly in and out of there without A, talking on the radio, and B, having a transponder. So in modern, high, technically advanced aircraft that have ADS-B Skywatch active traffic systems, you don't necessarily see everybody all the time.
And roughly how many miles away is it from the Ontario airport?
Yeah, so it's pretty much dead center on 5 nautical miles away, which would be a typical inner core of the airspace to the surface. And again, like I said, there's about a 1.5 mile cutout of that airspace if you were to look at a sectional chart just for Cable.
Now, you supplied a lot of the information that's known to date about the accident on the COPA forums, and you created a couple of YouTube videos as well to really demonstrate what happened. Tell us, where did you get the data for that video?
I fly a lot around Southern California quite a bit, and I actually got a letter in the mail from Torrance Airport about a potential noise situation. Ended up being an actual homeowners association that was looking to try to keep me away from flying over their houses. And it had a link to my track, and it's something I'd never seen before. So happened to click on the link and learn a little bit more about it. And it's actually a service that's provided by a company that has a number of airports around, not only Southern California, but the world. And it's actually the noise abatement software for Ontario International Airport. And so they have sensors that are very similar to what FlightAware and Flight Radar 24 uses, but probably a little more higher end than your Raspberry Pi that you would use for those. So I've kept that in my links, and it's something I actually use for real-time live traffic, and it shows every aircraft within its sensor range that it has a standard transponder, mode C, mode A, ADS-B. So that's the software.
It looked to me like the aircraft were visible at lower altitudes than you could see at flight aware. Doesn't that give you a little bit more information than you could get there?
Yeah, like I said, it's got a little more sophisticated sensors. And so it's using, basic triangulation between multiple sensors and the radar pulse that it just normally would reply to ATC radar. And so they use it for boundaries for noise abatement procedures. And so they're very, very accurate. And you can see that with the aircraft going in prior to the aircraft in question. We lose the signal pretty much just before touchdown of the aircraft, and the Bonanza in front of the aircraft in question. And so, yeah, it's very accurate.
So let's talk a little bit about the accident aircraft. First of all, where was it coming from? And tell us about the aircraft that was following, and what was the weather like at the time?
Yeah, so let's start with the weather. Weather was clear and a million. Good, normal kind of fall afternoon or morning in Southern California. So the Cirrus aircraft in question was coming from Torrance, and it was coming to Cable for an oil change. And I had heard that it had a new engine about 25 hours or so prior to the accident. And he's literally just coming there for an oil change after a number of flights in the days previous and weeks previous. As far as the aircraft that was coming in prior to it, it was coming in from the east, from the Palm Springs area. And that aircraft was actually traveling north of the Class Charlie airspace of Ontario and entered from the north and was talking on frequency.
So that aircraft, which was a Bonanza, essentially did an overhead crosswind above the airport at roughly pattern altitude, and then turned directly into the downwind?
Yeah, so one thing we have to take into account when we're looking at the pressure altitude that the transponder is transmitting is we need to take the altimeter setting difference into account to actually figure out what the actual altitude was. Now, ATC computers do that automatically. So according to that data, he was at or just slightly above traffic pattern altitude, which was 800 feet above field level. And one of the latest advisory circulars that the FAA has come out with recommends 1,000-foot traffic pattern altitude. So a lot of people, myself included, at uncontrolled fields, fly that 1,000-foot. Plus, it's just a little easier. Just add one number instead of trying to do some math in your head. So he was flying over field, standard entry, overflying for that airport, midfield, enter the downwind. Speed looked good for him. Pattern looked wide enough for him. And as far as I know, he was a pretty a regular of that airport.
So let's talk about the accident aircraft that was following him on the downwind. What was unusual about his approach to the airport?
Well, there's a number of things I've learned about this aircraft. One, from the data, he stayed pretty low. He never really went that high. He never, other than talking to Torrance Tower, he never was on the radio, including the CTAF frequency at Cable. His radar track actually puts him trying to avoid all the airspace around. Like I said, we have Brackett to the west, Ontario to the east, Chino to the southwest or southeast. And so he was kind of fishing his way through the airspace there. And when he enters the downwind, he's actually pretty low, anywhere between 300-400 feet lower than traffic pattern altitude, which again is only 800 feet. So that puts him anywhere between 400 and 500 feet above the surface of the runway. And he was fast. So the winds were pretty calm, maybe 3-4 knots. And he was low. He was tight. He was really close to the runway. The measurements, it looks somewhere in the neighborhood of 3/4 of a mile, maybe half a mile.
I measured it as about 0.3 of a mile. And I think that's pretty common. If somebody is low, yeah, exactly. If you're low, then your perspective changes. And in order to kind of make that angle look the same as you look down at the runway, you have to be in close to the airport. And that puts people in closer than they should be, which then makes it hard to make the subsequent turns when they need to happen.
Yeah, and you're correct. I can't read my chicken scratch. Yeah, it's 0.3 of a mile, not 3/4 of a mile. So, the other aircraft were right there at 3/4 to 1 mile. And again, the airspace is tight. So people might feel a little constricted and kind of, wedged in there a little bit in their mind. but not that tight, not 0.3 of a mile.
Well, it looks to me like he was also really close behind the airplane in front of him. I measured it as about 0.6 of a mile. When you're flying a Cirrus, how far do you stay behind the aircraft in front of you?
Oh, I'm typically at least a mile behind, especially at an uncontrolled field. I'm typically a little faster. You know, I'm 100 knots on downwind, where a 172, 152s, Cubs might be 90 or less. So you need to have that space between you to maintain the spacing.
Yep, and I'm often 2 miles behind. I know that if that shrinks to 1.5 miles, then almost regardless of what that aircraft does, landing in front of me, I'm going to be able to still land and not have to go around. So I think there's a good chance he might have had to go around anyway, just because he was fast and he was so close. Let's talk a little bit about this kind of a standard traffic pattern for a Cirrus. What is that supposed to look like?
Well, according to the FOM and what I've been taught by a CSIP, you know, and what you would teach in SR20s and SR22s, 100 knots downwind, 90 knots on base, 80 knots on final. It's real simple too. It's just easy to remember. 190, 80. And then, you know, you slow it up a little bit over the fence and over the numbers and put it into a nice flare. He was going a lot quicker than that, according to the data we have. Now, we could say could be inaccuracies in that, but from the looks of it, he was going a little too fast.
Yeah, and one of the problems with going fast is that turn radius is proportional to the square of your speed. So if your target is 100 knots and you're 10 knots fast, you're 10% fast, but your turn radius is going to be 21% larger. So I think this guy was really set up for a problem in that he was going fast and was already in close to the airport. It was going to make it almost impossible to be able to complete the turn to final.
And it's tragic because, you know, he could have just simply continued it on, you know, on a extended base and then re-entered the, you know, gone north and re-entered the traffic pattern, you know, absent of any mechanical failure or anything like that. And which we have to note, he wasn't on the radio. And so why wasn't he on the radio? We don't know that. There could have been something distracting him. We just don't know. But from the data that we have, yeah, he, you know, for all intents and purposes, it seemed like the aircraft at least had power that he could have gone around. And word of advice to everybody listening, just when in doubt, go around.
Indeed. You can always go around. So talk about the last few seconds of the flight.
Yeah, so according to the data and eyewitnesses at the scene, the plane, again, was in very close on a close left downwind. He was a little fast. He overshot the runway, the final turn. And the data shows that he actually, and again, it was low. So the data shows that he actually started a slight climb. The data shows about 100-foot bump. And the resolution, again, is only 100 feet. So where he was in that, we don't know for sure. But he overshot, and it's a really tight left turn to correct. And the radar data that we have puts him square on the same spot of the house that he unfortunately hit. But fortunately, everybody in the house was fine. So kind of that classic, unfortunately classic, turn, stall, spin, crash.
Yep, right on the base to final as he was overshooting the final. So what in your experience, what do people typically do if they look like they're overshooting final to try and make it work out?
Well, it's instinctual kind of, right? Unfortunately, we pull back. We hit rudder and we pull up. And those are the two worst things you can do in that situation, especially that low to the ground where caps, in our case with the Cirrus, is just not going to be effective. Just too low to the ground. We need at least 500 feet, and he was already at that. So you take reaction time into consideration. It was kind of over before it began.
And certainly long before I became a flight instructor, I know that I was under the misimpression that if I were overshooting final and if I just pushed a little bit harder on the rudder, if I was making a left turn, hey, just give it lots of left rudder, that somehow that was going to help me do the turn a little bit earlier. And what I've learned subsequently is that actually sets you up for the worst possible type of stall, because that low wing is going to drop really hard and fast, and it's going to be unrecoverable.
Yeah, these are things we can practice. We obviously don't want to practice them that close to the ground. We can do them up at altitude, of course, with an instructor that's done it before. It's good to know it's basic airmanship and And myself included, I train at least once a year with a CSIP. I know a lot of people that do it 2-3 times a year with a CSIP. And so CSIP or not, Cirrus or not, please just get up there and train. And this is why we learn stalls when we're learning to fly, is how to recover from them and kind of know the signs that are leading up to them.
In many ways, I think this all comes back to standard operating procedures. There's a standard procedure, and yet this pilot's flight in the pattern looked anything but standard. He was low, he was fast, he was in close to the runway. I mean, certainly he might have been able to tolerate one thing being off a little bit, but 3 things being off? I mean, I think we could have predicted long before he made that turn to final this was not going to work out.
Absolutely. And that's the biggest thing of training is understanding what those procedures are, and then recognizing when you are kind of breaking those rules. And unfortunately, this is like any other accident where it's not just one thing. It is a chain of events. And if he could have just break that chain somewhere, anywhere in that chain up until that last point, you and I probably wouldn't be talking right now.
Yeah, indeed. There's no question. When I see one thing when I'm flying that's not quite right, usually that's kind of when I bail out. It's like, okay, I don't want to get to the second, third things that are going to be problematic. Now, when you were flying with the airlines, you undoubtedly had standard operating procedures. And what were you required to do if you couldn't meet the criteria for landing?
Well, it was go around. Well, you probably wouldn't even get to that point to go around. You just, ask for a vector back around, try it again, which of course you call a go around, but you might still be at 3,000-4,000 feet. It was numbers and like you said, SOP, standard operating procedure, and it's drilled into every airline pilot, and it's there for a reason. You're flying with different crews every day or week, and you can hop in any airplane and with any crew and fly it perfectly safe and normal. Just like you and me, if we were to hop in an airplane in a Cirrus, you're going to expect me, because I've been trained properly, to fly those numbers. And it's a good thing. It's what we should all strive for, is kind of that professionalism in flying.
Well, a nice thing about flying by the numbers is it makes it really objective and easy to determine when you're not doing something correctly. I think a lot of pilots in perhaps other aircraft where the speeds aren't so highly, specified. I think of a Cessna 172. I believe they only just specify a speed for final. They don't talk about a speed for base and base for downwind. I think that's common for Pipers, Moonies, you name it. Most aircraft don't specify it as tightly as the Cirrus does. And if you follow those numbers, wow, things work out fine. If you don't follow the numbers, it's pretty easy to see that you've got a problem and that you ought to go around.
Yeah, and I think, there might not be specified by the manufacturer because the aircraft are so, originally certified so long ago. In my training at Embry-Riddle, we had standard operating procedures at Embry-Riddle, and a lot of flight schools adopt those. And so you're, 90 on downwind, 80 on base, and 75 on final, or 65 on short final. So it's been a while since I've flown a Cessna, but if you take those numbers and you ask those questions, you're going to be much better off.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think that when I fly with people, I see that they're not watching airspeed as often as they should when they're in the pattern. They're kind of, eyes outside looking at the runway, but they're not looking inside often enough to see what the airspeed is. And it can really get away from you pretty quickly. I probably am looking inside, outside at least every 3, maybe 4 seconds at the most, just to see what my airspeed is, because it can get away from you quickly.
It's having that scan. It's knowing your aircraft. I actually I don't wear Bose headsets with noise cancellation. I like hearing the feel of the airplane. And so, that has to do with it too. I can kind of sense it, but that just comes with experience and skill and time flying the airplane.
Well, you raise a really good point, which is the airplane talks to us.
Absolutely.
And as you're at different airspeeds, you can hear different sounds in the aircraft. And those are some of the cues that we get as a pilot that kind of tell us, ooh, maybe I better check my airspeed, because maybe it sounds like I'm a little fast, or maybe it sounds like I'm a little slow.
Absolutely. I mean, that's why I don't wear the noise canceling. Plus, I'm a little tall, and I don't know that I could close the door if I did wear them. So, yeah, but the larger point there is they do talk to us, and it's if something doesn't feel right, figure it out. Don't continue.
I like that. Often in security, they say if you see something, say something. And what you're saying is if something doesn't seem right, figure it out because it probably isn't.
Yeah, trust your gut.
Very good. Well, Eric, any final thoughts as we start to wrap up here?
Yeah, just, it's tragic. I hate even talking about this, but I think we can all learn from it. And again, I think I've said it before and I'll say it again, when in doubt, go around. That go around, we should always kind of be anticipating that go around it. Not just on final, it could be anywhere in the pattern. And so if you go too fast, go around. Just go around and do another one. In this situation with the airspace, I think there's something to point out here. We don't want to violate the rules in the FARs in the airspace, but if you have to make it safer in your current situation, what's a phone call? The FAA has been pretty lenient on, I don't even think in this case you'd get a phone call if you violated that little upper right-hand corner in that airspace. So your PIC, do what you need to do to get that airplane on the ground safely, and keeping it in the air might be the safest thing to do.
Yeah, and I think a key point there is that not every landing is meant to be. I think pilots sometimes just feel like they have to force it to work, and sometimes it's just not going to work no matter what you do, and you're far better off deciding that early and just going around. I used to, prior to becoming a CFI, kind of argue in my mind, should I go around? Well, I think I can make it work. Should I go around? And finally, the best advice that I ever heard was, the first time that you think maybe you should go around, that's the time to decide to go around.
Absolutely. I mean, to be transparent, yesterday I went around. I was in Catalina on an Angel flight, and I'd never landed on runway 4 there. It's always been runway 22. So I went around the first time. Just didn't seem right. The sight picture was weird to me. It's a new runway, so it looks a lot different. Went around, did it again. And, with 2 Angel flight passengers on board, you want it to be right. And if you're by yourself, you want it to be right. So go around. There's no shame in it.
Do you think sometimes pilots are so cost conscious that they're thinking, oh man, this is going to be another 0.1 on the Hobbs if I have to go around?
I think that definitely plays into it. I know when I was renting a Cirrus out of Long Beach, I was on the ground a long time waiting for a clearance to get out. And that definitely goes into your head. But honestly, 6 minutes for a 0.1, is it worth it?
Yeah, it's pretty cheap.
It's pretty cheap. And if you're building time, hey, it's time. So, it's not worth it. There's a lot of factors that play into it. I mean, who knows? He might have had somebody meeting him there, to pick him up. He might have had an Uber ride to get back. He wanted to beat traffic. Who knows? There's so many psychological factors that play into our decisions to do things, and just being self-aware and understanding that, hey, a go-around's only going to cost you less than 5 minutes probably, and it's worth it, because I don't want this ever to happen to anybody else. I know that's never going to happen. It's going to happen again somewhere to somebody, but please just take your time and try to stack that deck in your favor.
Yeah, there's no question. Anytime I've been rushing, usually bad things happen. So if you're late, you're late. It's not worth arriving at your funeral early.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, Eric, thanks so much for joining us today and kind of sharing some insight into this accident.
Yeah, I'm no expert here, but I have some pretty cool tools at my fingertips. I'm happy to share them. Again, this can just help one person not do this. We've done our job.
Well said. The noise monitor website that Eric used to create his video is a service from Brule & Kajar, which is a Danish engineering and electronics company in Copenhagen. It's the world's largest manufacturer and supplier of sound and vibration measurement equipment, according to Wikipedia. And I've gone to their website and it shows that they provide noise tracking at about 30 major airports in the U.S. And of course, you can see the traffic at many of the smaller airports that surround each of the major airports. They also have tracking at about 40 locations outside the U.S., mostly in English-speaking countries, though I see they also service a large number of airports in Spain. If you want to see if they track aircraft for your airport, just go to their web address, which I've included in the show notes. Now let's go to listener feedback. Here's a sampling of some of the email that I've received here over the last month or so. This comes from Mike in Southern California. I know him. He's an airline pilot. He says, I just finished your episode on electrical systems. Now that would be episode 113. Two items I thought I'd mention. I'll talk about my 1977 Cessna 182. It's a dirt simple electrical system, and I have one minor correction regarding the voltage regulator alternator system. The 1978 Q model went to a 28-volt system. Mine still has the 14-volt system, but they're essentially the same. What I'd like to point out is that the voltage regulator does not sit between the alternator and the bus, but between the alternator master switch and the alternator. It senses the voltage on the bus and controls the amount of current going into the alternator such that the output voltage remains at 14 volts. Essentially, it controls the alternator output by controlling the input to the field. And Mike, yes, I would agree. I mentioned that the voltage regulator was between the alternator and the battery. That would be the case with earlier generator systems. So thanks for that clarification there. Mike continues, another thing I've learned over time is that if the ammeter shows a serious high charging rate, especially immediately after engine start, one common cause can be the starter Bendix did not disengage, so the engine is driving the starter, which is now acting as a generator and putting unregulated current onto the bus. Some of my friends have put a simple indicator light in their airplane to show them if the starter is still engaged, but my technique is a little more simple. I just look at the ammeter immediately after engine start. I should say that I start the engine with only the battery half of the master switch on. So if I see a charging indication immediately following engine start, it's possible that either the starter key switch did not spring back to the both position from start, or the starter solenoid did not disengage. If I see a charge, I move the key switch to both. If it's still showing a charge, I shut down the engine immediately. Serious damage can occur with that sort of unregulated voltage on the main bus. If the ammeter looks good, I watch it as I turn the alternator half of the master switch on and watch for the needle to swing from discharge to charge, then move towards zero to indicate the battery is accepting the charge from the alternator to replenish the energy used to start the engine, and then I've confirmed all aspects of my charging system is healthy and I go about my day. Mike, thanks so much for that. And here's a comment from Frank in Nevada. He says, I'm responding to one of your listener comments on show 124, where a gentleman ran into the issue of CTAF and AWAS being on the same frequency. It sounds like he possibly ran into a Super AWAS. The Super AWAS ran into certification issues with the FAA back in 2010, and most federally funded airports have since replaced the system. However, with the high cost associated with replacing an AWAS, there are a few smaller, non-federally funded or privately owned airports that may still use the old Super AWAS. Because the Super AWAS lost its certification, the FAA considers it to provide advisory weather only as opposed to being an approved source of aviation weather information. Potomac Aviation Technology, who originally produced the Super AWAS, appears to possibly still be working to produce micro towers, which offer smaller airports with automated air traffic service or automated unicoms. And here's an email from Topher. He's from Virginia, and he's a lieutenant commander in the Navy. He says, I wanted to comment on the propeller safety episode, which was episode 125. He says, while I fly jets, the flight deck is a crowded place complete with E-2 and C-2 turboprop aircraft. As you can expect, keeping our sailors safe is a big concern, and one rule that we teach that I would like to add to your excellent discussion is to never walk through a prop arc. This is one of the first rules that I learned in Navy flight school. The best example that I would encourage your listeners to apply is if you are inspecting a nose gear and need to move forward to inspect the prop spinner and air intake, don't crouch forward underneath the propeller. Instead, stand up, walk around the prop to the front of the airplane, and continue your pre-flight. When I was learning to fly as a kid, I know I took the shortcut to get up to the nose faster. The Navy taught me to respect the prop and never put any piece of my body inside its arc. This is a rather simple rule that we use to keep our sailors safe on the flight deck and hangar bays. Even when an E-2 is below deck and maintenance and there is no chance the engine will start, I will walk the long way around to avoid walking through its arc. The habit will increase your awareness of propellers. Well, thanks so much for that, Topher. And here's an email from patron supporter Eric Finley. He says, as long as I'm emailing, here's some feedback on episode 128. I own a 182, which obviously has a left-right both fuel selector, and my flying mentor said using one tank at a time can give you an out if you run out of fuel. When the engine stops, you can switch tanks and know you have at least some fuel. Obviously, you shouldn't push it that low on fuel, but if you have a leak or forget a cap, you might have an out. Always take off and land on both tanks, though. And I would probably argue that you probably don't want to routinely use that practice because if you've got any kind of dirt or other material at the bottom of the tank, running the tank dry might pull that stuff into the engine. And via Twitter from a direct mail from Micah, he says, hey Max, I heard you talking about oxygen sensors on this week's Airplane Geeks. I just looked them up and thought I would send this to you as they are under $20 now, just in case you want to be able to mention it again. And sure enough, Amazon has them for well under $20, so I'll include a link to that in the show notes if you want to go ahead and get an oximeter so that you can measure your oxygen levels in flight. An email from Matthew in Washington. He says he's an avid listener. Thought you might be interested in the safety notice passed around from fellow CFIs up here in the Northwest. There was an unconfirmed rumor someone in the area actually found a bullet hole in their elevator. And the safety notice from the FAA is for the Pierce County Airport, Thune Field. It says they've received threats on 2 different occasions from an anonymous individual who's threatened to shoot aircraft that fly over or near 224th and Meridian, which I guess is an intersection of streets in the neighborhood. The individual made emphasized threats for all aircraft, and especially an aircraft described as the red single-engine plane. So watch out if you're flying up there near the Pierce County Airport. Let's go to listener questions. And both Adam from North Carolina and Jeff from Michigan had questions about the Autoland function. And I think most of Adam's questions are covered by Jeff, so let me go ahead and read those. And I got answers back from Garmin, so I want to thank them for responding. Jeff asked, are there modes or phases of flight that Autoland functionality is unavailable? Garmin responded, regarding phases of flight, Autoland can engage as long as the aircraft is flying and the autopilot can engage. And they also referenced their limitations, which we mentioned in that show. He also asked, if you were on approach in the landing configuration 100 feet from minimums, would it just complete the approach and land, or would it abort the landing and go missed? And Garmin responds, Autoland does not go missed. If Autoland begins the approach, it will complete it unless the pilot or passengers disengage the system. And Jeff says, in the same scenario, pilot is hands flying the airplane and suffers a diabetic episode, and the passenger selects Autoland, but the airplane has overshot the landing point too much. Would it try to take off or just put it down? And Garmin says, Autoland will climb to avoid terrain and obstacles, look for a suitable airport. The one the pilot was landing at may or may not be the best choice for Autoland, and then will initiate the approach into that airport. And Jeff asks, what happens if you have an autopilot malfunction or you fly through a GPS-degraded environment? Does Autoland just disconnect and select a heading hold mode? If a disconnect occurs, does Autoland downlink a message to ATC to alert them of a manual or auto disconnect? Garmin replies, if the autopilot has an issue, Autoland will attempt to re-engage the autopilot until the issue clears. If GPS is unavailable, Autoland will maintain heading and airspeed. Autoland does not currently inform ATC of these messages, since there may be nothing they can do, but we are looking at ways we can improve communication. And finally, he says, sorry for all the questions. Just seems like the number of scenarios to account for it would drive an absolute nightmare for the software development team. Is there a DAL, which is Design Assurance Level, associated with the system? And Garmin replies, as part of Garmin's special project with the FAA, Garmin and the FAA mutually determined Autoland's DAL through a system functional hazard assessment. Garmin designed the system to surpass the FAA's required DALs. And I want to thank several listeners who called or emailed this week and were interested in buying either new or used Cirrus. As always, if you'd like to chat, it's a free call. Just give me a ring, 650-967-2500. Or go out to aviationnewstalk.com and click on Contact at the top of the page. You can also use that to leave any listener questions or give us any feedback. I specialize in the Cirrus and work with people like you around the world. And finally, please take a moment to show your aviation friends how they can get the Aviation News Talk podcast too. And if they don't know what a podcast is, just send them out to the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store, where they can download our dedicated Aviation News Talk podcast app, just like they would download any other app. In the App Store, search for Aviation News Talk. And yeah, of course, those apps are free. So until next time, fly safely, have fun, and keep the blue side up.